Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes. Once again, this is Legal Matters, the program that's designed to address critical, sometimes contentious issues that are facing consumers and businesses today. It's legal information, it's practical solutions, and straight talk about a wide variety of topics. And certainly our topics have run the gamut from family law and to workers' compensation. Very recently, we had been speaking about children and reunification of children and with their parents and the DCYF system. Today we're going to be talking about children, but in a different context, a wider context, and we hope that it'll be helpful for you to have a little bit of background on the topic. How about green cards and the very contentious issue about immigration? The hot topic of the day is the 14th Amendment. We'll get into that in a little bit. So once again, we want to welcome Jackie Grasso and David Bazar from the law firm Audette, Bazar, Cordeiro Grasso law firm in East Providence, our legal eagles. So today, the guarantee of birthright citizenship. The opening sentence of the 14th Amendment, it's sweeping and it's clear, and it says, and I'll quote, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside." So it means, it should be very clear, of course, despite that plain language that you become a citizen when you're born here. Well, despite that plain language and its powerful history, there are opponents to that issue. So we're going to flesh out that topic a little bit today. Your thoughts about 14th Amendment, isn't it something that most people are not so aware of? Would you say that that's true?
Well, I think they've become aware of it now because it is a hot topic. It's been in the paper recently, and they've heard it on talk shows. But David has.
I would say this about the 14th Amendment. Most people think of the 14th Amendment. I would think the first thing that probably comes to mind is equal protection and due process. That's what most people think of the 14th Amendment, applying equal protection and due process to the states, whereas the Fifth Amendment may apply it to the federal government. What happened, just let's go back historically, and let's try a little bit to keep this on a legal issue basis rather than political,
yes.
because there's a lot of law that's involved in this whole issue. But going back historically, as you recall, the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868 or thereabouts following the Civil War. And this goes back to the whole state versus federal government issues and a lot of that. The federal government already had the first 10 amendments applying the Fifth Amendment with equal rights and due process. The 14th Amendment applied that to the states. And as you read that first sentence, it also said who are citizens of the United States. And again, remember, when the slaves were freed, there was a big issue as to whether or not, and it followed the Dred Scott case, were they citizens of the United States. And this was designed to say that if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen of the United States, with some exceptions to that, of course.
Well, it's nice that they corrected that horrible wrong, because certainly the African Americans were granted citizenship, and it was a good way to get rid of the idea that if you were aristocratic and it was your bloodline, you became a citizen, versus you were born on this soil, and therefore by that you have the birthright to your citizenship.
What's happening now is immigrants having children in the United States. If they're here illegally, then they're basically looking at that first sentence of the 14th Amendment, and they're saying, well, my child was born in the United States, therefore my child should be deemed a United States citizen, and that will help create the pathway for my becoming a citizen. It's often referred to as people who are here illegally, and unfortunately they've termed that child born in the United States as an anchor baby, which is seen as a not too
yeah, and that's sort of misleading too.
Good comment, yeah.
On the law, we're not getting into the politics of all this, but on the law, a child was born in the United States, and you did raise two issues. I'm born of parents who are U.S. citizens. If you're born in another country and your parents are U.S. citizens, you still can get your U.S. citizenship. Or, as you said, if you're born in the United States and your parents aren't U.S. citizens, according to the 14th Amendment, you are entitled to the U.S. citizenship. The anchor baby situation that Jackie is just referring to, people are arguing that people are coming to the United States so their children can be born in the United States so they can become citizens. And as Jackie will tell you, it doesn't work that way.
No, in order to become a citizen of the United States, the normal way is you come here on either a work visa or you're sponsored by someone. Under the situation where they have an illegal immigrant coming into the United States having a child here, they just presume or assume that the child's automatically a citizen. But that, in fact, is not true. Under federal law, a child cannot sponsor a parent to become a citizen until the child is 21.
Right. So the child may be, or
Citizen.
probably is a U.S. citizen, and there's some case law we can talk about on that, whether or not that's 100% accurate. But even if the child is a U.S. citizen, as Jackie's saying, 21 years goes by before they can even petition to get their parents' citizenship.
Well, I think that part of that political
And that's only
issue...
for a U.S. visa.
For a U.S. visa,
Yeah.
right.
But part of that issue about an illegal or an undocumented immigrant coming in and having a child here, the thought was that child becomes a citizen. However, the states are not so likely to say to the mom, I'm sorry, you'll have to leave, because that leaves the state taking care of the child. So they're a little less likely to scoot or boot the mother out. And even more so when you have even the father who's there, or supposedly the father. But in other words, that becomes contentious because they don't really want to separate them. And many of those now senators and others who are opponents of this whole issue really don't want to have a situation where people are bringing illegal aliens in by the droves, paying them. There's an underground ring. There are stories, these anecdotes that are just are mounting by the day about how many are coming in, and then just for the they're paying plenty for the express purpose of delivering that child.
Yeah, but let's just look at this legally. You don't go and change the 14th Amendment or the Constitution of the United States. You enforce the laws.
Yes.
And if there's immigration laws and the border is being infiltrated, whatever the word is that you used, illegally, enforce the law. The 14th Amendment has served this country very well since its inception and does not need to be changed. And it's really questionable, by the way. There's a case that followed the 14th Amendment in 1889, I think it was, or 1898, the United States versus Juan Kim Ark. In that case, it was a very interesting legal case. What happened was, in 1882, Congress passed a law that excluded Chinese people from the United States. It was called the Chinese Exclusion Act. You couldn't enter the United States, you couldn't become a U.S. citizen if you were from China. And Juan Kim Ark's parents were in the United States legally working before he was born, and then he was born in the United States. His parents went back to China, and he went back to visit them. When he came back to the United States, they wouldn't let him back in the second time, the first time they did, and it became a contentious legal matter, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, interpreting two legal issues out of this. First of all, the Constitution, as we know from law school, but they confirmed, trumps all other law. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And that law trumped that act of 1882 that excluded Chinese people from being citizens of the United States. So they said he was born here, his parents were here legally, that's what they said in that decision, and therefore, since he was subject to the jurisdiction, which was one of the big important lines you read in the first line of the 14th Amendment, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, he's a U.S. citizen. If his parents were here as an ambassador from China and he was born here, he wouldn't be a U.S. citizen. His parents weren't subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. It still remains to be seen. There's been some case law and some dicta, as they say in case law, as to whether or not someone who's here in the United States undocumented or illegally, if their children would get the same treatment as Juan Kim Ark did, since his parents were here legally when he was born.
You raise a good point. That's a good frame of reference. Again, thinking specifically